In this video, you're going to start learning how you can set up Webpack for production. So right now, we don't have any optimization, and if we were to rerun our regular Webpack build, we would remember just how bad it's getting. So if I do open up package.json, we have the build script, which we set up previously. This just runs Webpack. Let's go ahead and execute that from the terminal, something we haven't done in a long time. I'm going to clear the terminal output and use yarn run build to run that script. This is going to run Webpack, and what I want to point out is the total size of the bundle. Right here, it is just about 6 megabytes, which is ridiculous. Now, the good news is that almost all of this is source maps. So the goal in this video is to figure out how to better optimize things for production. We're going to try to get as much stuff as possible outside of bundle.js and into other files that can optionally load. So what we're going to do first is figure out how we can just run Webpack in production mode. This is very easy to do, and it comes with some nice benefits. Let's go ahead and pull up the documentation for all of this so you know exactly where it lives. We can head over to webpack.js.org to get there, and we're going to be heading over to the guides page. The guides page doesn't contain necessarily specific APIs. It contains big picture stuff, and there's actually a guide for production that I do want to make you aware of. Now, the good news is that in Webpack 3, it is way easier to set up your build for production than it was in the past. We now have this P flag. The P flag takes care of a whole bunch of stuff behind the scenes. It is going to allow us to minify our JavaScript code, and it's also going to go through the very important process of telling the other code that, hey, it should prepare itself for production. So libraries like React, they load some extra stuff for development purposes. When we use Webpack with the P flag, we're going to be setting the node env environment variable equal to production. That is going to signal to those third-party libraries to just load the most bare bones versions possible. So let's go ahead and get some quick wins under our belt. What we're going to do is create a second script. So over here, we're going to have a build dev script, that is build:dev, and then we're going to have an alternative one, build:prod for production, and this one is going to start off much the same. We're just going to run Webpack. But what we're going to do is add on that P flag. So let's go ahead and save package.json and see where this gets us. We are going to minify the code, and we're going to optimize how third-party libraries load. If I do go ahead over to the terminal and run it, yarn run build:prod, we can take a look. And remember, the previous size was 5.61 megabytes. So when you do run Webpack in production, it's going to take a bit longer. It's doing some optimization, and that takes time. Right here, what do we get? We get 5.17 megabytes. So we shaved off about half a megabyte, which is a good first step, but clearly there is still a lot of work left to do. So the next thing we're going to do is actually change the contents of the Webpack config file, depending on whether or not we are running in development mode or production mode. So the goal inside of here is to get access to some sort of variable, something along the lines of is production, that we can use to determine what values we should set down below. Now, in order to do this, what we're going to need to do is explore a separate way we can set up the Webpack config file. Instead of exporting an object, what we're actually going to do is export a function. So right here, module, .exports, we are going to export a function. It can just be an arrow function, doesn't really matter. And this function is going to return the object that is our Webpack config. So this is a perfectly valid and supported syntax. We can choose to export an object directly from webpackconfig.js, or we can choose to export a function, and that function, when called, returns the Webpack config object. If you do want to explore this in a little more detail, it is mentioned in the docs. We can go over to the Webpack documentation. We're going to go over to configuration types, and here we can look at some of the various things we can export. The one that we just used was exporting a function as shown right here. Now, what is the advantage to this? The advantage is that the function actually gets called with some stuff, and this is what we're going to be using. We're going to get access to the environment, and as we can see here, they're using the env.production value to determine what sort of dev tool value to add. And this is actually really similar to what we're about to get done. So right here, let's name this argument env. Then we're just going to go ahead and log it using console.log. I'll log the string env so we know what we're printing. and then I will, as the second argument, log the env variable. Now if I save the Webpack config file, we can rerun the build over inside of the terminal and see exactly what we get. I'm going to clear the output, rerun the build prod script, and you can see right here we're getting an env value of undefined. So this is not what we want. Currently, there is no value inside of there, which means there's no way to determine whether we're running the production script or the development script. In order to actually set this up, we have to change the command we run. Over here, we need to make a little tweak to the build prod command. What we're going to do is toss on an argument env, and we're going to give it a value. I'm going to give it the value of production. Now I know this is a little redundant. We have to add on the P flag and we have to add on this. Unfortunately, that is the only way to get both of these done. The redundancy is necessary in this case based off of the current Webpack API. But now if we go ahead and save package.json and we rerun the production build, we're going to see that the env value prints the string production. And that is exactly what we want. This is something we can latch onto, and we can use that to customize the actual Webpack config file. Now, if I were to run the other script, that would be the build::dev script, we can take a look at that. And here we are still getting undefined, which is correct. Now, we could set something up for this, but it's not necessary. So what we're going to do is just check if env is the string production right here in webpackconfig.js. We'll get that done. I'm going to make a const is production. I'm going to set it equal to, and all we're going to do is check if env equals the string production. If it is the string production, great, this will be true. If it's not, if it's undefined or something else, that's fine too. This will just be false, and we'll run Webpack without the production optimizations. So now that we do have a way to actually optimize our Webpack build further, let's go ahead and actually get that done. And the one thing we really need to tackle are these source maps. The source maps are taking up almost all of that size, about 5 megabytes of it. Now, we still want source maps in production. They're still important. But what we're going to do is opt for a slower version. So this means the build is going to be a little bit slower, but that's okay because we're only going to build for production, maybe at most a couple dozen times a day. So these small changes in speed aren't going to be a problem. They would have been a problem in development where we are adding new builds a couple of times a minute as we change our files. Now, this new production source map tool that we're going to use is going to create an external file. This external file is going to be huge, but it's only going to load when someone actually cracks open the DevTools. That means that when a regular user visits our app, they aren't going to have to get bogged down by the weight of that source map. So that's enough talking. Let's go ahead and actually get something done. Right here, we're going to add the ternary operator. I am going to check if is production is true. If it is true, we are going to use one string value. If it's not true, we're going to go ahead and use another. So if it is not production mode, we do still want to use cheat module eval source map. This is a great source map for development. But if we are in production mode, we're going to be using a different value. We're going to be using the regular old source-map. Source-map takes a lot more time to build, and it is an external file. This is great for production. We can actually play around with this over inside of the documentation as well. If we go down to DevTool, we can crack open all of the options we have. And if you remember, we explored this a long time ago. Right here, you can see that source map is really slow and the rebuild speed is just as bad, but it is suited for production and it does give us access to that original source, which is something we want. Now that we have this in place, let's go ahead and actually rerun the build. So I'm going to switch over to the terminal. I'm going to rerun yarn run build::prod. This is going to run the Webpack production build, and at the end of the day, we'll see the files that get outputted. Now, once again, this is going to take even more time than it did before, but that's okay because we're only going to be doing this every so often. It's going to go through the process, and we should see some file sizes in just a moment here, and we are. So now we have two files, two assets that Webpack is outputting. It is outputting bundle.js. This contains the core application JavaScript that is now a much smaller 600 266 kilobytes. And now we have the bundle.js.map file, which is a brand new file. This is about 4.71 megabytes. Now we're not concerned about this size because remember, this big file, it's only going to get loaded when someone actually cracks open the developer tools. For your regular users, the browser is never going to make a request for this file, which is a good thing. Before we go any further, I would like to boot up live server and make sure that everything is still working as expected, make sure the application still works, and make sure the source maps still work. I'm going to go ahead and get that one done. Over here, all we got to do is use npm run serve. This should boot up the server, and here we are. It's getting brought up, and good. Everything seems to be working correctly. I can go to the create expense page. I can add an expense with just some real quick dummy data, and it does indeed get added. If I crack open the console, we should have no errors. Everything is working as expected. Now, how do we test source maps? Well, remember, source maps for JavaScript are going to allow us to actually see things like errors that get thrown or console.log messages that print to the screen. And currently we have none of that. We could go ahead and add one in to make sure it is indeed working. So in app.js, for example, I can just toss a console.log right here, testing. This is just going to make sure that the source maps are still working. It is an important thing to test. Then over inside of the terminal, I can just rerun the production build. I'll restart the live server, and I'll make sure that everything still shows up. If it does, we're going to be able to move on to the next important thing, which is going to be to figure out how to extract our CSS out of that bundle.js file. We're going to break that out into its own styles file. So right here, the production build finished. I am going to restart the server with npm run serve. Over inside of the browser, I'm just going to crack open the console. And right here, you can see that we are getting the correct location. It is not pointing to some sort of line like line 25,000 of bundle.js. It is pointing towards where we wrote the code, line 14 of app.js. And right here, we see the unchanged file, even with our JSX in place. Now that this is working, let's go ahead and move on to the next thing we're going to optimize. And as I just mentioned, that is the ability to take all of this CSS that we import and actually have it get dumped into an external styles file. Now, actually getting that done is going to be the topic of the next video. So to wrap this one up, I am going to remove the console.log and save things. And let's just take a quick moment to recap. In this one, we did a couple of important things. One of them was creating a separate script that allows us to set up our production Webpack build. Here, we use the P flag. This allows us to minify our JavaScript, and it also sets the production environment variable for our third-party libraries. Both very important things. They used to be very difficult to do. Now it's super easy. We just add on this flag. We also set up the env production flag. This allows us to customize how webpack.config.js generates that object. We switched from exporting an object to exporting a function that returns the object, and this allows us to access the environment and use it in the object configuration. Currently, the only place we're doing that is right here. If we're in production, we use one type of source map. If we're not in production, we use a different type of source map, and that gave us some great savings in terms of the total size of bundle.js. So that is it for this video. I will see you in the next one.